G'day, Binanceans, and welcome to this week's Binance Beach. This week, we got Stokesy back on the show. It's been a bit of a crazy week in markets. We saw new all-time highs for some coins, and then some pretty significant moves back down. So let's break it all down. Mate, welcome back to the show.
Liam, good to see you. Good to see you gallivanting around the place.
Gallivanting's the right word for it. Been moving a lot, but it's cool. It's cool to see the world. So basically, let's start with a bit of a narrative on the market for the last week. And about, I think it was 6 days ago, or last weekend, we saw what could be what some are hailing as one of the most important policy shifts this cycle from the Fed. They had the Jackson Hole conference, I think it was. Powell made a speech, and there were a bunch of takeaways from that, which moved markets pretty significantly. But there was an article that came out from Bloomberg, which sparked a pretty red hot crypto Twitter debate, and I think broader macro debate. And the article read, I'll quote from this. Powell said that the Fed has adopted a new framework that removes a reference to the central bank seeking inflation that averages 2% over time, and one to it making decisions based on employment, based on shortfalls from its maximum level. So that did spark a lot of debate, but I think there's one really core question that came out of that Powell speech and those updates. Stokesy, I'll put it to you. Did the Federal Reserve just abandon their 2% inflation target?
So much to unpack. Great question. Okay, so you can see is the speech from Powell during the Jackson Hole meeting on Friday was very dovish. The market reacted accordingly. It's like, yeah, look at us go. We're now going to cut interest rates. That rally seemed to last about 24 hours before all those gains were just wiped off the market immediately. Ultimately, in the macro, it comes down to this. The United States government, and I would suggest many governments around the world are in a similar situation. Do you want to keep inflation low, or do you want to allow jobs to flourish? So there's this competing situation where if you want to keep inflation low, you put interest rates up, you make money expensive, that's going to hurt the job market because there's not enough money to invest. Therefore, that money to invest doesn't grow businesses. Therefore, it doesn't employ people. So when the job numbers don't look so attractive, that is, employment numbers don't look attractive, as a government, as a Fed, as a leader, as an economist, you have to say, well, which one do we want more? Do we want to slow down inflation, or do we want to keep people unemployed or give people jobs and allow inflation to run amok? The 2% inflation mark was set, of all places, by the New Zealand government many years ago. And it seemed to be just a good anchor point, a good reference, if you will, that allowed governments to print money to a rate of around 2% per annum. That was called in economic terms the natural rate of inflation. But the truth is there's no such thing as a natural rate of inflation, because the natural state of a free market, I'm quoting Jeff Booth here, is deflationary. So when technology improves, when production lines become more efficient, when we can make stuff in a quicker and easier way, the natural state of the free market is that things become cheaper. So what's this inflation thing? This inflation thing isn't the inflation of prices. It is the inflation of the money supply. Okay, so now we bring it back to, right, what is the Fed going to do? Well, the debt in the United States at over $37 trillion and growing fast, and it's not just America, it's everywhere that's got trillions of dollars of debt. How do they deal with this debt? Well, they can't print their way out of it because that creates inflation. So if you listen to what Scott Bessent said, right, the debt to GDP ratio is out of whack. The debt is too high compared to the GDP. So noting we can't pay down the debt, as proven by Doge and Elon Musk, and I would suggest the very good efforts initially, they say, right, well, we're not going to pay off the debt. Let's grow the GDP so we can, if you will, make the debt to GDP ratio more sustainable, more attractive, more reasonable. So the only way they can grow the economy is, of course, is to press print, which then goes on to what many have said, nothing is stopping this train. Nothing will stop the money printer going brr. So it's a long way of saying that ultimately we're at the point now that we realize as many Bitcoiners already realize, you'll never pay off the debt. You can't pay off the debt. All you can do is get the debt to GDP ratio to look more attractive. And the only way you can grow GDP is to make money cheaper. And the only way you can make money cheaper is by reducing the interest rate. And the only way to reduce the interest rate is to have our overlord, Jerome Powell, say, yes, we will lower the interest rate. And consequently, that was a long way of saying, particularly in his speech, similar to my speech just then, in a long way of saying, right, we've got to pivot and we've got to allow the money printer to go brr. But I would suggest, to close this all off, I would suggest that the Fed, although it's supposed to be neutral, I would suggest that it is not acting neutral. And there is obviously very clear friction between Jerome Powell and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump obviously wants to lower the interest rate, not just to grow the economy, but to deal with the $37 trillion in debt and climbing fast. So that love or hate Trump, he's the guy that has to deal with it. And he needs those interest rates lowered. But we can see that Jerome Powell doesn't like being told what to do because he's the Fed chair and the Fed is operating independently because it's not a federal entity and it has reserves of nothing. So what should happen is he should lower the interest rates. But I would suggest that there's personality clashes here where Trump and Powell don't like each other. It's no secret. And Trump doesn't want to give up on his push to lower the interest rates, but Powell doesn't want to bend the knee and say, all right, Trump, I'll do as I'm told. But ultimately, if the Fed really cares about the US economy, they've got to cut the rates.
Isn't it bonkers that the personal battle of two men, or the political battle of two men, I think is probably reducing it to call it a personal battle. It's a political battle, even if there could be egos involved. And the few paragraphs from one of those men pivoting slightly can add trillions of dollars in market cap in 24 hours. It's just such a wild concept to step back and think about it in that frame. But
what it actually
do you
does,
have a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, very well said. What it does, it actually amplifies or magnifies the absurdity of the Federal Reserve. It magnifies the absurdity of the dollar, not just the US dollar, all dollars, all fiats anywhere. And this is why it's so exciting in the Bitcoin space, because we are now shining a big spotlight on the biggest Ponzi scheme in the history of humanity. Not Bitcoin, not even Amway. We're talking about specifically the US dollar and all fiats everywhere. And it is absurd that one man who's not elected, who is not a federal entity, he controls essentially the world economy. And I recently released a video talking about who's more powerful, the President of the United States or the chair of the Federal Reserve, because the president can't sack the Fed or the Fed chair, and the Fed can control all the purse streams of basically the interest rates and how much money they're printing, essentially. And America doesn't elect that person. Well, hang on. The president puts that person into the position, but he can't later fire that person. And Australia has nothing to do with that, but we deal with the consequences of it. So yes, it is absolutely absurd that two men bickering can have a flow-on effect. But take it a step further, it's even more absurd that one man who's not elected can control what's happening in the global economic space due to the flow-on effect of the power of the US dollar. But then it's even more absurd when we go even wider. It's like, what's this dollar thing? Who gets to print this money out of thin air? Particularly noting that the natural state of the free market is deflationary, not inflationary.
As Balaji says, dollar inflation is global taxation. It is an incredible system. And if you do go down the rabbit hole to try and figure it out, it'll take you to some pretty strange places. But let's get back to crypto. What does this mean for crypto and other asset prices if we're going to abandon or at least loosen guidance on that 2% inflation target? What does that mean for digital assets?
It means we pump, in simple terms, when there is lower interest rates, when there is more global liquidity, markets pump. And the crypto markets are very sensitive, particularly when we've got very small market caps compared to, if you will, with the gold markets or the real estate markets or the derivatives markets. Because we've got lower market caps, that means we have greater potential to move further. So when the money printer goes brr, money is cheaper, people will invest more, they will take more risks, they'll go on to the risk on assets. And some would argue that in the past it was the tech assets the tech stocks that were the risk assets. People have kind of bundled cryptocurrencies into those tech stocks, wrongly or rightly. But we are the most sensitive to global liquidity and interest rates, and we are probably the most sensitive to the global political stage as well. So, and when I say we're talking, of course, crypto land here. Ultimately, my friend, it means that it's finally moon time. But of course, because it's crypto, anything can happen. And many of us are scratching our heads, just as we were talking off camera before. It's like, this market has been so weird. This cycle has been so weird. Every macro indicator says we are moon time, baby. I mean, you've got the institutions here, you've got a friendly SEC, you've got the United States government having a strategic reserve, you've got the first time of ETFs globally, particularly in the United States, not just for Bitcoin, but for Ethereum. You have an all-time high before the halving. Everything in the macro, and I could go on further with that list, is so bullish. And yet here we are, nice and slow climbs, but none of these massive blow-off tops that we've had in the past. You go to bed and you look at your portfolio and it says $1 million, and you wake up in the morning and it says $8 million. That hasn't happened yet. And many of us are waiting for this to happen. So look, in crypto, anything can happen, but ultimately everything's lined up to go to the moon, even beyond and to Mars. It just hasn't happened yet.
Do you think that's because the smart money is moving into Bitcoin, right? The institutional capital is predominantly moving into Bitcoin and to a lesser extent has been moving into ETH. But those ETH ETF flows have been relatively, underwhelming compared to the Bitcoin ETF flows. And then that capital just hasn't rotated through the market because the smart money is betting on sovereign debt crisis, not moon boy crypto summer. I feel like that dynamics at play a little bit here, where it takes so much now to move Bitcoin as a $2 trillion asset, and the inflows from vehicles like ETFs, from institutions, from Strategy, from 21, from Nakamoto, from all of those Bitcoin treasury companies, they're not those waves of retail FOMO. They are systematic, buys or DCAs or entries over time, and they're professional entries, not fat finger the big buy. Do you feel like that maybe is the dynamic of play here, where we're still yet to see retail rotate their capital from Bitcoin and to a lesser extent ETH into the rest of the ecosystem? And maybe there's an argument to be made that that's not going to happen if a lot of that new flow is institutional, which is definitely not going further down the risk curve.
Fantastic insight and a talking point. The reality is we can see that the retail investors are not here yet. So in previous cycles, in fact, in all cycles, it was only the retail investors, because the institutions, whether they wanted to be here or not, they weren't allowed to be. The SEC overlords and governments around the world wouldn't allow them to be here. So it's always been a retail market because the others weren't allowed here, or they didn't believe in it. Now we realize in this cycle that yes, it's all the institutions that are here. The reason why they're going to Bitcoin is because there's 16 years of data. It's the best performing asset in the history of humanity, and the risk is becoming much lower, but the return is much higher. Now, when we say the return is much higher, the crypto bros will say, no, man, diminishing returns. I can get a 10,000x in pick your meme coin. Stop thinking like I say this to the crypto bros out there, stop thinking like a crypto bro and start thinking like the smart money. The smart money, the big institutions, the BlackRocks, whether you like them or not, their business is money. They've been in the game of money a lot longer than many of us have been alive, and consequently they understand risk, but they also understand reward. And whilst we want, who doesn't, a 10,000x on pick a coin, they understand that, hey, if I can get 20% in 2 months, that's an exceptional return. That is an astonishingly good return. Even if I can get 20% in a year, which Bitcoin is well outperforming that. The CAGR at the moment is about 67% per annum over the 10-year and about 187% over the 15 years per annum. And so you can see that the big boys are saying, well, hang on a second, if I can get a CAGR of 67% on a very low risk asset, why would I bother with anything else? The crypto bros are like, nah, man, just give me the 1000x, but they forget the part of the risk to reward ratio, meaning that there's two parts. You want the big reward, sure, but you're going to get the big risk. So Bitcoin will continue to attract this capital, the smart money. It will continue to attract the retail investors who have, I would say, fiscal maturity and experience in these crypto markets, because they understand, look, it's all bleeding to Bitcoin. All of it, it's all bleeding to Bitcoin. The XRP army will tell me I'm wrong, but look at the data. XRP is stalled out at $3, failing to hit its all-time high. Maybe it will come, but they've been saying it for 10 years. I'm not saying don't get those coins. I've got other coins. I've got meme coins. I've got lots of altcoins. But the best performing asset and the safest asset is Bitcoin. So what will happen is when the retail investors come in here, of course, the retail investors will say, essentially the dumb money will come in and go, no, I'm going to go get Pepe, and I love Pepe, and they're going to put it into Doge and Shiba Inu and all these, the better Bitcoin and the better Ethereum, and you're just going to see the same thing play out again. They're all going to track to zero. The experienced players are going to go in there and buy those coins, not because they believe in their long-term outcome, but they just realize they can make a quick return on it and get out at the right time. But ultimately, all the money, eventually, it's all flowing to Bitcoin. It's the best performing asset in so many ways, not just in the crypto markets, but in the traditional markets. If you look at why it was created and what it has grown to be, it makes sense that even now nation states are saying, well, hang on, the dollar's done, all fiat's done, all fiat always fails. Where am I going to park my money? And people say, well, I'm going to put it in gold. It's like, yeah, well, gold's got a purpose, but it's slow, it's heavy, it's cumbersome, it's a yellow rock, we don't know the supply. So where do you put your money? And the answer, not according to me, but according to the markets, is Bitcoin.
All right, apologies for a bit of background noise, guys. It's just started hooking rain here. But that was a great answer, Stokesy. And I think the key takeaway from that is that when you look at the market as a whole, Bitcoin is the underdog against gold. And that is a race that you can bet on as an investor. And, I think the Bitcoin boys, the Bitcoin bros have looked at gold. They've looked at Bitcoin. They believe Bitcoin's fundamentally better, which gives Bitcoin roughly 10x up to the gold market cap from here as almost like the starting point, right? And so Bitcoin is the underdog. Bitcoin has the growth potential. Bitcoin is monetizing in real time, and we're expecting that arc to continue. But everything below Bitcoin, everything down from there is a different game. And being a layer one blockchain and trying to do real world assets, payments, you're competing against an entirely different set of competitors. Ethereum, Solana, XRP, Cardano, all of those blockchains are competing against not only each other, but then they're competing against existing payment systems like Visa and MasterCard, and Stripe and PayPal. And then they're also going to continue to compete against whatever corporate blockchain solutions come out. I think there was an announcement yesterday I was reading quickly about Google looking at another layer one, like Circle's looking at layer one, Uniswap looks at layer one. Like everybody has an incentive to move to their own chain to capture that value, to capture the fees. And not only that, from like a corporate business perspective, it is really hard unless there is an enormous amount of users that you can go and capture by moving onto, a chain, onto an L1 or an L2, which I don't think there is. Like for someone like Google or Microsoft or Meta, like there isn't enough value on any of those L1s yet for them to move onto them for the long term. And the key part of that decision too is like if you're going to build a business around someone else's tech, a different business's tech, like someone else's L1, and you've got no insight or no influence or no control over the governance processes. Do you care that it's decentralized? No, not really. Do users care that it's decentralized? Yeah, no, maybe a small percentage, but potentially not so many. And so I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to really see a lot of change in that L1 space. And that is a really tough competition to pick. I think to do your own research there is really important, and come up with your thesis for why this L1 or that L1 might outperform not only the options that are on the market at the moment, but the options that are coming down the line. But for Bitcoin competes against gold. And I think, like, for me, that's such a clear break in the market and such a easy, analysis to do. Not maybe easy analysis is not the right way to put it, but it's such a clear piece of analysis to do. And, of course, us Bitcoin boys, we think it's better and we're betting on that. So it's an interesting part of the cycle. It's been a fascinating cycle. I know you kind of said you're tired. I definitely feel a bit tired. Like it feels like it's dragged on, and we haven't got some of that euphoria that we're used to in previous cycles. How do you cope? How do you get through when it's just grind after grind after grind?
That's probably the most important question of all of this, because there's a lot of emotion in the markets, and the truth is the market is emotion. So that's why we have a fear and greed index. Markets are made up of people. People are made up of emotions, and those emotions lead to buys and sells. And there's so many memes. There's one meme in particular. I've seen this guy where he's smashed his computer, he's smashed his bedroom, and he basically says, "F Bitcoin, F Ethereum, F crypto, I'm out." But the reality is that this is very stressful for a lot of people. A lot of people have put their life savings into this. I wouldn't suggest that's a good thing to do, but many people realize that they're not going to get into the property market. Many people realize that this is perhaps their only opportunity to create some form of wealth, let alone generational wealth. And noting that we see so many people who have made so much money in previous cycles, it gets, a bit of jealousy kicks in and say, well, why haven't I made this money? Equally, a lot of people fall for the narrative of a tribe of pick your coin. There's over 2 million coins. They say it's a better Bitcoin. Everyone's going to use this. This is the ultimate layer one. Everything else is too slow. Mine's the best of everything. And then they buy into the narrative. They get a tattoo on their body. They throw in all their money and they lose everything. They lose absolutely everything. So we go back to first principles, Liam. The first principles is, first of all, realize that all investments come with risk. Realize that there's no certainty of anything in life except for the certainty of change, next to life and death and taxes, of course. But then, also realize that you have to step away sometimes. So the best advice is, every now and then, sometimes just get out and touch grass. Get out, shut the computer, and commentators like yourself and our job, I would suggest, is to constantly turn up. I've been doing this for nearly 10 years now, and I'm exhausted. But on the other side, I've made stupid amounts of money in this space, but I've also helped a lot of people make a lot of money. And more importantly, I've helped a lot of people not lose so much money. It comes down to this. Go back to the first principles of only invest what you can afford to lose. Realize that all investments come with risk. Understand the risk to reward ratio. Don't fall for a narrative, and then get back to the basics. So right now I've got my dog in the studio, if you can hear noise in the background. My dog is my bestie in here. He's my escape. When it comes to what you're doing, of course, traveling, you need to, really the basics. You have to keep fit. You've got to keep moving. You've got to get away from that screen. You've got to walk. You've got to build relationships. And finally, I would suggest, when it comes to crypto, we're a very, very small minority of the world's population. And we've got our crypto tribes. But make sure you become part of a good tribe that doesn't fall for just one narrative for one coin, but a tribe that can actually question their own narrative. Hey, I reckon this is the best coin in the world. What are my blind spots? Oh, well, actually, have you considered this? And don't react to that question. Don't react to that, well, how dare you, super hypersonic, my coin's the best in the world. That doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help anyone, particularly yourself, particularly if you end up being wrong. We all want to get ahead. We all want to have a family. We all want to have money. We all want to be able to live without any stress and maybe even get that Lambo. But if you get too entrenched into the tribe, into the tribal speak, and that tribe is, I would suggest, immature, not in personality, but perhaps in crypto experience, if they don't have the maturity that is needed to understand these markets, you're going to get wrecked. Check your blind spots, question everything you say, get out and touch grass, and you'll be fine.
Great advice, DYOR, Binance. Over the last 48 days, the US has added $1 trillion to their fiscal debt. And that is surging by something like $21 billion per day. It's up almost $2 trillion in 2 years. Adam Kabisi, who writes the Kabisi letter, excellent macro analysis on Twitter, he asked a question in his tweet, and I want to put it to you, Stokesy. At what point does this start to matter?
Oh, God, that's a powerful question. So if you listen to the great economist, and you look at financial history throughout the world, it starts slowly and then suddenly. And the analogy I give you is that there's going to be it's like a crack in a dam. Imagine a big dam holding back the water. And you see this little wet patch and you're like, oh, what's that? And that's kind of the debt that we're seeing. But then you start to see a trickle of water coming out of that wet patch. And you're like, oh, that doesn't look good. But then suddenly the whole dam just breaks. Boom. And that's hyperinflation. That's where in the morning your loaf of bread costs $5. By lunchtime it costs $20. and by dinner time, it costs $150. That is the dam breaking. So the breaking point in fiscal terms is when hyperinflation hits, when people realize there's going to be some news event, something saying we have defaulted. Now, who will be the default? It'll be a government, it'll be a massive institution, it'll be a collapse of a bank, something massive like the global financial crisis of 2008, where there will be a tipping point within a few hours, possibly within a few minutes. It'll hit the news and the ripple effect will be catastrophic across global economies. And people will be fleeing for the exits as this metaphoric dam of debt floods and destroys everyone. And of course, us sitting on the life raft of Bitcoin, we will just float away, and in fact will be lifted even higher because in this metaphoric example, the flooding of the debt that destroys everyone will just raise Bitcoin even higher and higher. They've got to go somewhere. Where do you put your money? Now, some say it's gold, and I think gold will ride out the storm as well, but things move quicker in digital. So there will be a tipping point, and that tipping point will be a government defaulting on a debt, a big government, probably the US, defaulting publicly. Or it will be a massive bank collapsing, or it will be another breakout of some type of war or pandemic. But my bet is on, in my belief, it's going to be the collapse of a major bank or a massive default by a central bank, a government somewhere in the world.
And what does that mean for everyday Aussies? Why is the US fiscal situation halfway around the world so relevant for us?
Great question. The center of gravity in the global financial markets is the US dollar. And we are, you just look throughout history, whatever the US does, they catch a cold. Sorry, what's the saying go? They cough and we catch a cold, or they sneeze and we catch the flu. And it's because the biggest financial system in the world is the United States. And you can see when the Fed makes a move, it affects everyone. So whether it is, you go throughout history, the Roman Empire, the Dutch Empire, the French Empire, the Spanish Empire, the British Empire, it's now the US Empire. It's now even quicker with these global markets. So what it would mean for Australia is if it collapsed, just same with the GFC, it flowed over to Australia. We were pretty sheltered from the GFC at that stage, but we're deeply tied, I would suggest even more so, to the United States now. What it will look like in a massive cascade of catastrophe, fiscal catastrophe around the world, all of your savings, all of Australian savings will whittle away by 50%, almost wiped off immediately. The purchasing power will be wiped off immediately. If the purchasing power is not wiped off because of the integration of our banks with foreign banks, you're going to see massive bail-in laws activated. So a bail-in law is where banks will, and the law is in place, this isn't a speculative belief, look it up, the law is in place where if the banks are in big trouble, which they are, they're all broke, even though they can print all this money out of thin air, they are legally allowed to steal the depositors' savings to prop themselves up. So as this flows through the global markets, everyone's savings in Australian bank accounts, in this example, when a bail-in law is activated, 20 to 30 to 50% will be stolen from your bank accounts immediately by the banks to prop themselves up. Too big to fail. The secondary effect or concurrent effect is what you have got left will be devalued terribly because the printing machines will go ballistic trying to prop up a dollar that is collapsing. It's going to be catastrophic. And then the social effect from that is quite literally riots in the streets. That's what happens historically. People will be furious that their money is stolen. People will be violent because they are desperate to actually feed their kids and feed themselves. You saw what happened in Australia when there was a shortage of toilet paper. If you think you saw chaos when guys and girls couldn't get toilet paper, you wait to see what happens when mums and dad can't get food for their kids. It is going to be wild. And that is why I've released on my channel, even as an economist, I've released a survival series, an urban survival series. It's not about Bear Grylls running through the bush and being a Rambo and hunting pigs. It's like literally dealing with chaos in an urban environment and how to prepare for that. Hey, if it never happens, fantastic. But I don't get in my car every day and not put my seatbelt on because I think, oh, well, I'm not going to crash. You put your seatbelt on just in case. You put a helmet on when you ride just in case. And I would suggest to everyone, you get some bloody Bitcoin just in case. However, when it comes to just in case, it's not a this could happen. In my opinion, in history's proof, this is going to happen.
Powerful. And, really paradigm shifting, right? Because we have had so much confidence in the number in our bank account for so long. And it really is an entirely different way of looking at the world when you start to doubt that. And it's a pretty scary thing to start to consider. But yeah, I think it is something that you need to do. It is something that you need to start thinking. Because, as exactly you point out, the historical precedent is there, and it's not within our lifetimes necessarily in the West, but it is within our lifetimes in many other countries around the world. And it is within our Western timeline for, our grandparents or our great grandparents. It's not that long ago that we've had these kind of like major, decline or we've had, the Weimar Republic between World War I and World War II. Highly recommend checking out that book, When Money Dies, by Adam Ferguson, that gives a really, really good account of that hyperinflationary event. It's really not that far away, even though it feels a million miles away. But I love talking macro with you. It's too good. But let's finish on crypto again. Circle back. Why have asset prices fallen again this week? We've had a big old dump after the Fed pivot surge. What's going on? Why are we down again? It's after all of this bullishness, after everything we said. Why are we going down?
Yeah, look, I'm looking at the heat map now. Bitcoin at time of recording 113,144, Ethereum at 4,574. I would suggest, everyone's got an opinion, no one really knows, but I would suggest primarily it was all the leveraged longs that were washed out. The big market makers that actually Binance, I would suggest, the biggest platform on planet Earth, and it's a free market. There was a lot of leveraged longs out there, and they cleared those positions. I would suggest there's a lot of whales who have control over the market in the sense, even though there's a massive market cap, the retail investors aren't here. It's all the institutions, and the institutions have a stupid amount of money. I look at it this way, Liam. I think what's actually happening is that the big boys are doing absolutely everything in their power to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible before they let the handbrake off. Or the analogy we keep hearing is that it's a big beach ball or a ball that's being held below the ocean, and they're holding on with dear life, but the ball's getting so much pressure in it that eventually it's going to let go and shoot up through the ocean and into the atmosphere. All the other coins, they're just noise in the background at the moment. Ethereum certainly got some play, but let's face it, the Bitcoin dominance at time of recording is nearly 60% still. And Bitcoin, just as the US dollar is the center of gravity for the global financial markets, Bitcoin is the center of gravity for the crypto markets. And all eyes are on Bitcoin. Yes, the altcoins are doing their thing, and there's always going to be an outlier, particularly when there's more than 2 million coins now, and meme coins are just being pumped out every minute. Watch Bitcoin. The big boys are trying to get as much Bitcoin as possible. They're trying to hold the handbrake, if you will, or the brakes onto the train, and nothing is stopping this train. But once it's going to get to a point, where they say, we can no longer hold this back. It's too big. There's too much demand. There's too much scarcity. There's too much liquidity in the markets. There's too lower interest rates. It's going to be this perfect symbiotic point in time where it all happens at once, and bang, the beach ball is going to be released from the depths of the ocean. It's going to shoot up. If you hate Bitcoin, and I know not you, but generally speaking, I know many people hate Bitcoin. I don't know why, particularly if you're in crypto. If Bitcoin wins, you all win. If Bitcoin wins, your altcoin's going up. So watch Bitcoin. It's still doing well at $113,000. My prediction this cycle is 147,500 US dollars at the low end. We're going to get to, in my opinion, 147,500 US dollars, at which time Ethereum's going to 10,000, BNB's crossing the $1,000 mark, Solana will probably get to 1,000, XRP, look, XRP Army will tell you it's going to $10,000. There's not enough money on planet Earth for that. Another conservative effort for them is $500, still not enough money in the world. I would suggest there's probably XRP $4 to $5, maybe. And all the other altcoins, there's going to be random outliers. It's not long left. The handbrake's about to release. Global liquidity is coming in. Retail investors are lining up. Dollars collapsing. Let's go, baby.
Final question, one more. I have to lay on you. Do we have a cycle, or is the cycle over?
Ah, fantastic question. So there's two parts to this. One say, never say this time is different, because you're going to get wrecked. Some say there's always going to be a 4-year cycle, but the truth is this time is different. It is different because the halvings aren't so brutal anymore. When you go from 50 coins per block reward to 25, even though they're worth less, psychologically 50 to 25 is heaps. But when you go from 3 to 1.5, psychologically that's not so much. But equally this time, as I mentioned, we've got this spot-backed ETFs, we've got a friendly SEC, we've got a friendly United States, we've got a lot more maturity, we've got a lot more understanding, we've got a lot more data. Everything is different this cycle. So will there always be a 4-year cycle? Well, maybe it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and typically we get to the November, December mark. Many people are tired, as we've mentioned a couple of times here. They are broke. They want the money, particularly the long-term players, the retail investors. We get to November, December, they sell because they think it's the 4-year cycle, and that in itself makes the 4-year cycle, the self-fulfilling prophecy. However, as you've spoken about the institutional investors here, and as we know they are a lot smarter and they've got a lot more money, whether we like it or not, maybe they ride this cycle out so it goes even longer. That is a very long way of saying, I don't know.
Maybe, maybe not. That's great answer. I'll take that. Thanks for jumping on again, Stokesy. Great chat, mate. Always a pleasure.
Great work, Liam. Good to speak to you.
All right, guys. Last call out is come join us at AusCryptoCon. We've got 10% discount code, and the prices are going up on September the 1st. So we've got the link that you guys can use to come and find us at the convention. We've got swag for all of our Binance users this year. Come along, play some games, and meet the team. Otherwise, guys, have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye. Please note that this discussion includes insights from non-affiliated third parties and key opinion leaders. Binance provides this platform for informational and educational purposes only and is not responsible for any content or insights provided. This information should not be considered as financial, tax, or investment advice from Binance. DYOR Binanceans.